Thank you. Thanks for waking up early to see me and everybody else. Who is this guy? I guess I'm supposed to ignore him. All right, so, hi. All right, you were hard to ignore. All right. So I'll get started, I'll be okay. All right, so if you read the 2008 white paper, Satoshi Nakamoto concludes with this sentence, actually the first sentence of his conclusion. We have proposed a system for electronic transaction without relying on trust. All right, so that's just not true. Right? Bitcoin is not a system that doesn't rely on trust. It eliminates certain trust intermediaries, but you have to trust Bitcoin, whatever that means. And in general, what blockchains do is they can change the nature of trust. They can displace trust, they can reshape trust, and really to the extent that blockchains are A, interesting or B, valuable, it's this. And to the extent that they are uninteresting and useless, it is also this. So in order to understand any of this, you need to think in terms of trust, which really means thinking in terms of systems. And I'm a big fan of systems thinking. I think that it's really in too short a supply in the tech world right now, and that we need a lot more of it. All right, so let's talk about blockchain. I want to get away from the hype. I want to get away from the current price of Bitcoin. And I want to talk about something very specific here, the data structures and protocols that make up a public blockchain. Private blockchains are, I think, 100% uninteresting. Right? They're Merkle chains. They're easy to create. They're easy to secure. They don't need any special properties. You can achieve the same effect in many other ways. Right? We've been doing consensus protocols and distributed systems for like 60 years. GitHub is a fine consensus protocol without blockchain. Write-only ledgers, no problem, nothing interesting there. So public blockchains are what's new. And that's three elements that make them work, right? The ledger, the record of what happened and in what order, the consensus algorithm that ensures that all copies of the ledger are the same, and the token, the currency, right? The digital thing of value that aligns incentives to make the whole system work. And all these pieces fit together as a single system, and it actually is kind of cool. Question, of course, is it good for anything? And that gets back to trust. So I think when I read blockchain enthusiasts writing, I think they have a very unnaturally narrow definition of trust. And I'll read things like, in code we trust, in math we trust, in crypto we trust. So that's trust as verification. Right? Trust as a verification mechanism. And verification aids in trust, that is true, but you cannot replace trust with verification. All right, so let's talk about trust for a bit. This morning, I woke up in a hotel room. I trusted the locks on the door, everybody in the hotel who had a key. I went down to the first floor, I guess the ground floor, I'm in Europe, had breakfast, trusted an enormous number of people involved in food distribution, food preparation. There were other diners, maybe some of you. I trusted none of them would leap up and attack me. Left my hotel, trusted all sorts of people on the street, got onto a tram, a whole lot of trust there. Cars on the street, got here, all of you. Right? An enormous amount of trust went into my morning, and it's like it's barely past 9 o'clock. And trust is essential to society. Humans as a species are very trusting. And we are all sitting here, basically strangers, and nobody has leapt up to attack the person sitting next to them. Right? Some of you laugh, but we are the only species on the planet that can get away with that kind of behavior. If we were chimpanzees, this would be impossible. And that that trust, right? We trust many thousands of times a day, and society can't function without it. And the fact that we don't think about it most of the time is a measure of how well trust works. So trust is a real complicated concept. The word is overloaded with a lot of meanings. So there's a personal, intimate form of trust. When we say we trust a friend, it's less about their specific actions and more about them as a person, right? Some general reliance they will behave in a trustworthy manner. I trust their intentions, and I know their intentions will form their actions, right? We can talk more about that kind of trust. There's also a less intimate, less personal trust, right? I might not know someone personally or know their motivations, but I trust their actions. This is more like the trust going on in this room. Right? I don't know if somebody wants to steal, but maybe I trust that they won't. And that trust maybe is more confidence, and that trustworthiness is more compliance. In another sense, I'm reducing trust to predictability or consistency. And there's a real leap of faith here beyond confidence, because there really is no confidence. It's hard to quantify. And in today's society, we trust people, institutions, and systems. Right? I flew here yesterday. I trusted the pilot, except kind of not really. I trusted that Air France has a system to put well-trained and well-rested pilots into cockpits on schedule. When I went from the airport into Basel, I trusted a taxi driver. But again, not really. I trusted the system that produced licensed taxi drivers. It's similarly, when I put my ATM card into a machine yesterday and got out Swiss francs, I trusted some very complex international banking system that would withdraw a similar amount of money from my account in the United States and then give me the cash here. And I don't even know how that system works. And so this trust is relative, it's fluid, it's multidimensional. Right? I can trust Alice to return a $10 loan but not a $10,000 loan. I might trust Bob to return a $10,000 loan but not to babysit an infant. I can trust Carol to babysit an infant but not with my house keys. I might trust Dave with my house keys but not with a $10 loan. I can trust no one with my computer passwords. I can trust my brakes to stop my car, ATM machines to dispense money from my account. And in the United States, there's something called Angie's List that I trust to find me a plumber, even though I actually have no idea who Angie is. So in 2012, I wrote a book about trust and security. And in it, I listed 4 very general security systems that we use to elicit trust. First one is morals. Very general term. A lot of our trust behavior comes from inside our own heads. Most of us don't steal not because of laws and door locks, but because we believe it's wrong. And then these are feelings of guilt and shame when we do wrong, senses of fairness and altruism, desires to be honest, feelings of group belonging, deferences to authority. There's biological, there's cultural factors that go into this. It's complex, but it actually works really well. It's most of what's working in this room right now. What's also working in this room is another system we use, which is reputation. Wholly different and stronger. Right? And so a lot of trust behavior stems from how others respond to our actions. We get praised for good behavior, we get snubbed for bad behavior. And we are very sensitive to reputation information. How we are perceived, how we perceive others. Right? Gossip, information about each other. There's a strong theory that language developed as a way for us to transmit reputation information. And humans are unique here. There are other species that deal in reputation. There are other mammals, and actually some birds too, that recognize individuals and use reputation. But we are the only species that can transfer it, right? I can tell him about him. And that allows us to scale reputation. These two systems are very old. They're as old as humanity. You can find them in some non-human primates. But of course, they don't scale very well. And we have more trust systems that allow society to scale to larger communities. The first one I'll call institutions. But basically, it's rules and laws. Laws basically formalize reputation. They're norms that have been codified, whose enforcement has been delegated. And of course, they induce people to behave in a certain manner. And a lot of our trust comes from these laws if it's a government, but rules if it's a non-government organization. And lastly, security systems, right? Mechanisms that do things like induce cooperation or prevent bad behavior, induce trust, compel compliance. And we could list lots of these: door locks, tall fences, alarm systems, guards, forensic and auditing systems, mitigation and recovery systems. Right, these technologies change through human history, basically doing the same sorts of things. And they all work together. Right? Most of us don't steal because we know it's wrong. A lot of us don't steal because what would our friends think? Very few of us don't steal because what if we get caught? And way at the top, a tiny percentage of us don't steal because we can't get through the door lock. Right? But that door lock only works because of everything else in that stack. Right, modern banking is the same way. Morals prevent most theft and fraud. Financial institutions, merchants, individuals, all concerned about reputation. Lots of laws and regulations, and lots of security systems. Again, all working in concert. So, in his really good book, Blockchain and the New Architecture of Trust, Kevin Werbach, who I don't think is in the room, he outlines 4 different trust architectures. And let's think about them in relation to what I just said. Peer-to-peer trust, right? The most intimate. I trust you, you trust in me. Works great, doesn't scale. What he calls Leviathan trust, which is, I think, more institutional. I think about contracts mediated by the government. We don't trust each other, but there is a dispute resolution system that we both trust, so we can enter into a contract. Third is intermediary trust. Think of, PayPal or a credit card. I don't trust the merchant doesn't trust me, but we both trust Visa to make the transaction work. And the fourth is what blockchain enables, which is a distributed trust, which is an emergent trust in the system without any individuals in the system trusting each other. And in this way, blockchain reduces trust in intermediaries. Doesn't make them go away. Doesn't make the need for institutions go away, but it helps coordinate across trust boundaries. Right? Blockchain shifts trust in people and institutions to trust in technology. So you have to trust the cryptography. You have to trust the software. You have to trust the computers. You have to trust the network. You have to trust the people who are making all this work. And a lot of these are single points of failure. Right? If a Bitcoin exchange gets hacked, you lose your money. If you forget your login credentials, you lose your money. It's even worse for smart contracts. And it's an interesting question to ask. Would you rather trust a human legal system or the details of some computer code that you actually probably don't have the expertise to audit in the first place? And in a lot of ways, trusting technology is harder than trusting people. Blockchain doesn't necessarily reduce the cost of trust. It shifts it around. The way to think of blockchains are 3-sided markets. The buyer and the seller, those are the obvious ones, but the miners. And the miners are paying the cost of trust in those proof-of-work systems. And that can be a very expensive cost. The cost of the Bitcoin mined, the cost of the transaction fees, I'm thinking of a Bitcoin here, transaction fees, the environmental waste. That is an expensive amount we are paying for the trust in that system. And it doesn't remove the need for institutional trust. You still need it because the technology naturally centralizes. Bitcoin might theoretically be based on distributed trust. Yet practically, that's just not true. You have to trust the wallets, and there aren't many of them. You have to trust the exchanges, and there aren't many of them. You have to trust the software, the operating systems, and the computers that everything's running on. And if you think about the attacks on Bitcoin, this is where they are. They don't go against the math. They go against the computer science. You need institutional trust also because people still need to be in charge of these systems. There always is a need for governance outside the system. And you see the debates about changing the Bitcoin block size or fixing the Ethereum DAO attack. Right? Those are examples where governance has to come back into the system to deal with problems. There's always a need to be able to override the rules. There's always a need to be able to make permanent changes in the rules when things change. And think about the IETF as a process for making permanent rule changes as a consensus-based system. Right? There's an example of that. And blockchain systems will always have to exist with other, more conventional systems. Right? Bitcoin will always need to interoperate with the rest of the financial world. And that interface, with its laws and norms, often require breaking the trust architecture of the blockchain system. And you can't have a Bitcoin system where transactions clear immediately work with a credit card system where transactions clear in 3 days. Right, this is how Steve Wozniak got scammed out of $70,000. Right? It's across that trust boundary. And also in any distributed trust systems, there are backdoor methods for centralization to creep in. Right? In Bitcoin, there really are only a few miners. Only one company makes mining hardware. There are only a few dominant exchanges. And to the extent that normal people interact with Bitcoin, it's through those centralized systems. And trust is why regular people like normal ways to exchange value, like credit cards. It is a key feature of trust that if the transaction goes bad, you get your money back. That if your credentials are stolen, you get your money back. Right? That is a feature of the system. Regulations that protect users from fraud are a feature. So are regulations that disrupt terrorist financing, organized crime, money laundering, traffic in illegal goods. I mean, yes, these systems can be costly, and there's a lot of talk about the cost of intermediaries. And that some of that's the inherent middleman problem, and some of it's because trust can be expensive. Right? Trust isn't free. So in order to succeed, blockchains have to be trusted. To the extent that people don't use Bitcoin, it's because they don't trust Bitcoin. And that has nothing to do with the cryptography or the protocols. Right? In fact, a system where you lose your life savings if you forget your key is not particularly trustworthy. Right? A currency that is volatile is not particularly trustworthy. And that's the human way of looking at trust. I mean, look at Ethereum and trying to move to proof of stake. And that is an interesting example of the way trust is working. I mean, the fact that we have hard forks means we still need trusted people. And this trust is a lot more complicated than transaction verification. Blockchains are trusted based on reputation. Right? People, not us, regular people, will choose Bitcoin or not based on reputation. They'll choose an exchange or a wallet based on reputation. They'll read an article. They'll get a recommendation from a friend. It'll be a reputation-based trust decision. Even in crypto, we evaluate crypto algorithms based on reputation. It's mathematically informed reputation, but it is still reputation. We use this algorithm because it's been around for 20 years, no one's broken it yet, and it's got a good reputation. Look at the various blockchain supply chain security systems. I think they're interesting here. Okay, so of course blockchain is not necessary for any of these systems. The real reason they work is everyone has a single software platform to enter their data. And even though the systems are built on blockchain distributed trust, there are companies that just don't accept that. There are companies that don't trust the IBM Maersk supply chain blockchain system because it's IBM Maersk and not them. And that's how trust works. You can't replace it with algorithms and protocols because it's much more social than that. Right? It's a human thing. So truly understanding this requires systems thinking. And I really want everybody who designs and implements blockchains to understand the systems they're working in. I mean, these are ridiculously large distributed systems. Again, not just the tech, but also the social parts, and we really need to know how they work. Right, so do we need a public blockchain? I think the answer is almost certainly no. And by this, I'm really answering the security question, not the marketing question. Blockchains likely don't solve the security problems you think they solve. The security problems they solve are probably not the ones people have. Manipulating audit data is rarely in the top list of threats systems face. The security problems they cause are probably more than people want to deal with. The inefficiencies, especially scaling, are another problem. And there actually are almost always simpler and better ways of achieving the same security properties. So that's the bad news. But to really answer the question, you have to look at the trust architecture. Right? Does the blockchain change it in any meaningful way, or does it just shift it around to no real effect? Does it just try to replace trust with verification? What aspects of trust does it try to fix and fail? Does it strengthen existing trust relationships, or does it go against them? Are the trust intermediaries of the new architecture better or worse than the old architecture? How can trust be abused in the new system? And is it better or worse than in the old system? And lastly, what would the same system look like if it didn't use blockchain at all? And my guess is that if you ask those questions seriously, in most cases, people will choose solutions that don't use a public blockchain because of all the problems they bring. I'm not saying that they're useless. They do things. But I've really yet to find an example where the things they do are worth the problems they bring. So thank you.